Well, hello there, and welcome back to Leading Learning Moment. Today we're going to talk about the final tier in our PLC commitment to learning, which is our culture of confident learners. And so today I want to talk to you a little bit about how do we begin to shift sort of the mindset and the work that is taking place on a campus on a fundamental day-by-day basis. See, the culture of confident learning is an important tier of this framework of this pyramid because it really deals with the structures and strategies that are used on a daily basis on the campus to impact student learning. The culture of confident learning is important because it deals with the intentionality of what happens on a campus, the intentional thoughts, the intentional actions of students and teachers in a way that helps everybody involved on the campus understand that their daily efforts and their practices make a fundamental change and difference in student learning. And so that's what we want to talk about today. And how can we as a PLC and as a campus begin to take some very prescriptive steps to build this culture around confident learning. And so one of the first things I want to do is talk about the first steps that can happen, which is looking at how we use assessments. And so I'm going to put a slide up here for you to help you understand the shift from what we call assessment of learning to assessment for learning. And, I like to go even a step further than just shifting from of learning to for learning and using a term that I like, which is evidence of learning. I believe the idea of establishing evidence of learning helps everyone in the organization, including students, move away from this idea that assessments or tests or some quantifiable calculation of learning is a sufficient means by which to engage in the understanding of the level of mastery learning attained by each student. So I want high-functioning PLCs to move beyond just a reaction-based response to learning indicators, and that's usually acquired through assessments or tests, and to pursue rational responses and behaviors based upon theory and proven best practices. One of the best ways to begin to do this shift towards evidence of learning, or moving from an assessment of learning to an assessment for learning, is to implement a learning progression, an evidence of learning progression. And I want to put this slide up here and walk you through how I think this will fundamentally change how PLCs work in a way that develops this culture of confident learning that I'm talking about. So take a look at this slide and you'll see that this evidence of learning progression allows PLCs to follow 5 steps as they study, a particular learning standard or a cluster of standards, and develop these learning targets for these standards, along with developing high quality formative assessments to inform progress about those standards. And then they use that data from those assessments to collaboratively sort of attack and track the process of improving student learning. And, one of the best sources of data for this type of learning progression is performance-based learning. And so again, this reinforces this idea that we're getting away from using tests and assessments in the sort of the traditional way. And we actually have students undertake activities, structured learning, and demonstrate what they know in terms of mastery of that standard outside of just the typical testing and assessment strategy that we do. The power in this is it begins to shift the thought process and the beliefs and ideas for both students and teachers. And what I mean by that is this. Students shift from a focus on studying hard and striving for some targeted grade to understanding what success looks like and how they can use various performance data to understand how to do better each and every time. And for teachers, the shift becomes this: a shift from a focus on covering material or standards to understanding the importance of collaboration with colleagues and students to best understand student learning needs and how to realize mastery learning for all. And so now that this shift has happened, there's one other step that needs to take place in this process of shifting a culture and developing a culture of confident learners. And that is how we use assessment and how we use corrective instruction. So we do definitely need to assess student learning. And I propose one way to do that through that learning progression, and to use performance-based assessments. But we can't use a variety of assessments of standards and student mastery of those standards. But there's some fundamental things that we need to do within kind of the assessment process, and then ideally what we do in terms of corrective instruction after that. So take a look at this slide here, which identifies kind of how we're going to look at assessing student learning. And so the first thing that each PLC needs to do is settle for nothing less than the highest quality common assessments that they can develop in order to measure student mastery. And what high quality assessments allow teachers to do is to quickly and accurately identify when a teaching problem has occurred, so that they can adapt and address the learning gaps in a timely manner. And so using these high quality assessments as a routine practice then allows teacher teams to diagnose whole class, small group, and individual student learning needs and intervene in a timely method. And the second piece of that is we need to then have corrective instruction based on that assessment data. And that again needs to be in a timely process. Let me put this slide up for you here and talk to you about what are the fundamental components of really good corrective instruction. So just as we don't want to settle for anything less than high quality assessment, we also, as a PLC, don't want to settle for anything less than high quality corrective instruction that can help students or fix or address whatever learning needs they still have. And typically, students will respond better during intervention supports when they are involved in more hands-on or collaborative learning experiences. And a key reminder here is they should have at least some introductory or cursory understanding of the standard from the initial instruction, and now they just need to have time to develop that understanding and apply it to kind of what they already know. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about this corrective instruction, because on its face value, that can be very overwhelming to teachers. Teachers can think, well, I've already created the initial instruction, and I might have even created a couple of small group or station-based reinforcing activities. Now I've taught everything, students are still struggling with it. Now what do I do? How do I come up with yet another way to teach that concept or that standard or that skill? Well, that's where the PLCs come into play, and that's where the power of an effectively operating PLC can then come alongside and partner with the teacher and say, you know what, that may not be my area. Maybe I teach calculus and not geometry, but I should know enough about math that I can come alongside and help my colleague develop some other ways to teach that geometric concept or skill. That's just one example, say at the secondary level. At the elementary level, it's a little bit easier. A lot of times you have multiple teachers teaching the same grade level and even the same content, and you can partner with that, or you can even share students across teachers and come up with those ways to try to tackle the idea of corrective instruction to really promote student learning. So I hope that you'll see that this culture of confident learning happens through very prescriptive and very intentional efforts about thought, efforts about actions, both from students and teachers. And once we create this culture, we begin to shift sort of the ideas that are in the heads of students and ideas that are in the heads of teachers. And everybody, as you remember from our initial conversation about this framework, think of it as two tracks. We have both students and teachers thriving in this culture of confident learners, where everyone is confident about their abilities and their role and their opportunities to grow students as learners. So I hope that this entire framework has been helpful and useful to you. If you have any questions about any of the 4 tiers, you can always go back to one of the other videos that I've recorded, and that'll give you some specifics about each of those tiers. You're also welcome to go back to or over to my Leading Learning Matters blog, which I go into much more detail and give some additional advice and tips for leaders who are trying to implement these pieces or these components on with the PLCs on their campuses with their teams. And so again, thank you for joining me with this conversation about this PLC commitment to learning framework. I hope that you find it valuable and useful, and I hope you dive in and see where you are. I encourage your teams to do some self-reflection about where they are as a PLC, and maybe they jump in at tier 2 or tier 3, but make sure those fundamental pieces of tier 1 and tier 2 are taken care of before you jump into the common work. And then this piece of creating the culture of confident learning, because without that fundamental work, unless you take care of those deficiency needs, PLCs are always going to struggle. They're always going to have a hard time trying to do the work because they don't have those systems in place, and they certainly don't have a common understanding about the value of professional collaboration. Thanks again for watching us, and I hope that you have a great day, have a great year, do what's great for kids.